The morning sun filtered through the towering windows of courtroom 302, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. Marcus Thompson stood at the threshold, his fingers absently smoothing the blue silk tie he'd worn to countless debate competitions. The courthouse's marble floors echoed with each step as he made his way to his seat, the familiar scent of lemon polish and aged wood filling his lungs. Sarah Thompson sat beside her son, her waitress uniform partially hidden beneath a borrowed blazer. She'd switched shifts at the diner to be here. Knowing how nervous Marcus had been about his first court appearance, the broken taillight wasn't even his fault. A minor accident in the school parking lot had cracked the plastic covering, and they'd already scheduled a repair for the following week. "You've got this," Sarah whispered, squeezing his hand. Marcus nodded, remembering how they'd rehearsed his explanation the night before in their small kitchen. He'd stood before the refrigerator, practicing his words while his mother pretended to be the judge, using a wooden spoon as a makeshift gavel. The courtroom filled steadily with the morning's cases: parking violations, speeding tickets, and other minor infractions. Marcus observed each case carefully, noting how most defendants received standard fines or warnings. His debate team training kicked in as he analyzed the patterns, the way certain phrases seemed to resonate better with Judge Cartwright. When the bailiff called Thompson Marcus, his voice carried across the courtroom with unexpected weight. Marcus rose, his shoes squeaking slightly against the floor. Judge William Cartwright peered down from his bench, his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed the citation. "Mr. Thompson, you're here for operating a vehicle with defective equipment, specifically a broken taillight. How do you plead?" Judge Cartwright's voice was neutral, but his eyes held something Marcus couldn't quite read. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice clear and steady just as he practiced, "I acknowledge the broken taillight and take full responsibility. The damage occurred last Tuesday in an accident at my school's parking lot. I have documentation here showing my scheduled repair appointment for next week. I've been using public transportation whenever possible to minimize driving with this issue." Marcus produced the repair shop's paperwork with steady hands, watching as the bailiff carried it to the judge. His mother's warmth radiated beside him, a reminder of everything they'd built together: his perfect GPA, his debate team captaincy, his early acceptance to State University's pre-law program. Judge Cartwright examined the documentation, his expression unchanging. The silence in the courtroom grew heavy, broken only by the soft whir of the ceiling fans above. When he finally spoke, his words fell like stones into still water. "Mr. Thompson, I find your explanation insufficient. While you've taken steps to address the issue, you continue to operate an unsafe vehicle. This court takes public safety very seriously." The judge's gavel rose and fell. "I'm imposing a fine of $500 to be paid within 30 days. The words hit Marcus like a physical force. $500, more than twice what they'd been prepared for, more than 5 times the usual fine for such violations. He heard his mother's sharp intake of breath, felt the subtle tremor in her hand as she gripped the bench. "But Your Honor," Marcus started, his debate instincts kicking in, ready to present precedent cases of similar violations. "That will be all, Mr. Thompson." Judge Cartwright cut him off, already looking down at the next case file. "Bailiff, next case." As Marcus sank back into his seat, the morning sun seemed dimmer somehow, the shadows in courtroom 302 longer and darker than before. His mother's borrowed blazer suddenly felt too tight, the silk tie too constricting. Neither of them could have known that this moment, this seemingly routine traffic hearing, would spark a chain of events that would transform not just their lives, but their entire community. The fluorescent lights of Metro Community College buzzed overhead as Sarah Thompson struggled to focus on Professor Chen's lecture about accounts receivable. Her accounting textbook lay open, but her eyes kept drifting to the notification letter poking out from her folder. $500 due in 30 days, a sum that threatened to unravel 3 years of careful saving for Marcus's college fund. And that's why proper documentation is crucial. Professor Chen's words suddenly cut through her worry. Sarah's pen stopped mid-doodle, her attention caught by the term documentation. She glanced around the half-empty classroom, where other night students, mostly working parents like herself, fought their own battles with exhaustion. During the brief study break, Sarah pulled out her phone, checking her banking app for the 5th time that day. Her morning shift tips from the diner were already deposited, $43.25. She'd picked up an extra weekend shift at her second job, the bookstore, but even with that, the math wasn't adding up. "You look like you could use this," whispered Jasmine, her study partner, sliding over a cup of coffee from the vending machine. "Everything okay?" Sarah hesitated, then found herself sharing the morning's court experience. As she spoke, Jasmine's expression shifted from concern to recognition. "My cousin had something similar happen last month," Jasmine said, lowering her voice. "Different judge, but same story. Fine way above the usual." She started keeping track of all the cases she saw while waiting for her hearing. Said the patterns were interesting. Sarah's accountant-in-training mind clicked into gear. Patterns, data, documentation. Perhaps there was more to understand here than just her son's case. After class, Sarah sat in her old Toyota, the engine cooling in the quiet parking lot. She pulled out her phone again, but this time not to check her balance. Instead, she opened her calendar app, mapping out the next 30 days. Morning shifts at the diner, afternoon shifts at the bookstore, night classes 4 times a week. Sleep would be a luxury, but she'd managed with less before. The drive home took her past the courthouse, its stone facade ghostly under streetlights. Sarah slowed down, noticing for the first time how many cars still filled the parking lot even at this late hour. How many other families were dealing with their own version of this story. When she finally walked through her apartment door at 11:43 p.m., she found Marcus asleep at the kitchen table, his debate team research spread around him like a paper fortress. A post-it note stuck to his laptop read, "Mom, found some interesting cases similar to mine. Can we talk in the morning?" Sarah smiled, despite her exhaustion. Her son, always the researcher, always looking for answers. She gently draped her jacket over his shoulders, remembering how small he'd looked in that massive courtroom. At her own small desk, Sarah opened a fresh Excel spreadsheet. The blank cells glowed back at her, waiting to be filled with purpose. Column A, date. Column B, case type. Column C, defendant demographics. Column D, fine amount. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she remembered Professor Chen's words about documentation. "We're not just paying this fine, Marcus," she whispered to her sleeping son. "We're going to understand why it happened." She began typing, each keystroke a quiet act of determination. The next court session was in 2 days. She'd be there, not just as a mother working to pay a fine, but as an observer, a documentarian, a seeker of patterns in a system she was only beginning to truly see. Outside their apartment window, the city hummed with nighttime energy, unaware that in this small, warm kitchen, a simple spreadsheet was about to become something much more powerful. Evidence. Lisa Chen's fingers paused over her keyboard as the last echoes of footsteps faded from the courthouse hallway. The evening cleaning crew had just passed her office, marking another day's end. But for Lisa, the most important part of her day was just beginning. The clock on her computer read 7:15 p.m. She pulled out her lunch container, still untouched from morning, and opened the day's case files. 6 months of working late had taught her to savor these quiet moments when the courthouse transformed from a bustling hub of activity to a sanctuary of secrets held in mandala folders and digital archives. Her spreadsheet glowed on the monitor, a masterpiece of organization that would have made her accounting professor mother proud. Each row told a story, dates, names carefully coded to protect privacy, case types, fines, and demographic details gathered from public records. The patterns had started as mere whispers in the data, but now they shouted from every pivot table and graph. Tonight's entries included Marcus Thompson's case, Lisa remembered his poised demeanor, so different from the attitude cited in Judge Cartwright's notes. She'd seen that disconnect before, too many times to count. Her cursor hovered over the cell containing his fine amount, $500. Another data point that didn't fit the standard distribution. Just the facts, she whispered to herself, a mantra inherited from her father, a retired journalist. It had become her shield against the emotional weight of what she was documenting. The facts were clear enough without editorial comment. Similar violations, dramatically different outcomes. A notification popped up on her screen, an email from Sarah Thompson requesting public records for recent traffic violation cases. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. In 6 months of data collection, this was the first time someone else had started pulling at the same threads. She minimized her spreadsheet and opened the courthouse's public database. The official records told one story, but her spreadsheet, with its careful cross-references and pattern analysis, told another. Lisa had originally started this project to improve the court's efficiency metrics, but it had evolved into something far more significant. The heating system hummed to life, startling her. Lisa realized she'd been staring at her screen for nearly an hour, lost in thought. She pulled up her personal email account and began drafting a message to her old statistics professor at the university. The subject line read, "Hypothetical data analysis question." Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother, a civil rights attorney in Seattle. "You still at work?" She glanced at the time. 8:45 p.m. Another late night, but she couldn't stop now. Not when the patterns were becoming so clear, not when others were starting to ask questions. Lisa opened a new tab in her spreadsheet, labeled Statistical Analysis. Her statistics minor hadn't been used much in her court clerk duties until now, but the formulas came back easily. Standard deviations, confidence intervals, regression analyses, each calculation adding weight to what she'd observed. As she worked, a memory surfaced, her father's voice from years ago, explaining why he'd spent 30 years as a local reporter. Sometimes, sweetheart, the biggest stories aren't about what people do wrong, but about who's willing to keep track of it. The cleaning crew passed by again on their final round. Lisa saved her file, encrypted as always, with today's new entries strengthening the statistical significance of her findings. Tomorrow, she'd make a backup copy, just in case. Small actions, careful documentation, quiet persistence. These were her weapons in the fight for truth. She gathered her things, her untouched lunch now becoming dinner, and took one last look at her screen. The file name blinked back at her, HopeForChange.xlex, a simple name for a document that was becoming anything but simple. Kiara Thompson's social media agency office hummed with the quiet energy of 24 monitors, each screen reflecting the blue glow of various platforms and analytics dashboards. But today, her attention was fixed on just one screen, the one showing her brother's story, carefully crafted into a series of posts that would soon ripple across the digital landscape. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked, leaning over her shoulder. He'd come straight from debate team practice, his tie loosened but his concern evident in the way he studied each word she'd written. "Trust your big sister," Kiara replied, adjusting the brightness on her monitor. At 25, she built her reputation on understanding how stories move through digital spaces. "We're not attacking anyone. We're just sharing experiences and asking questions." Her first post was simple, a photo of Marcus in his debate team blazer, alongside his academic achievements and community service record. The second showed the repair shop receipt and the court documents. No accusations, no inflammatory language, just facts arranged in a way that made people want to know more. "Watch this," she said, clicking post on the carefully timed sequence. Within minutes, comments began appearing. Then shares. Then messages from people with similar stories. Among the flood of notifications, one direct message caught her eye. "James Richardson, civil rights attorney, would like to discuss your brother's case. Please call at your convenience." Kiara recognized the name from pro bono cases featured in the local news. She was about to call Marcus over when another message appeared, this one from Lisa Chen. Kiera blinked, surprised. The court clerk had created a private account just to reach out. I have relevant information. Can we meet? The office's white noise faded as Kiera focused on her analytics dashboard. The story was spreading beyond their city now, picking up momentum in legal forums and community groups. Each share brought new stories, new data points, new allies. Her phone buzzed, her mother calling from her break at the diner. Honey, people are coming and talking about Marcus's story. Some of them had the same judge. They're asking how to share their experiences. Kiera opened a new document, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she created a simple template. Share your story, with clear guidelines for formatting and fact-checking. She'd learned from previous campaigns that authenticity was everything. Each story needed to be verifiable, each detail backed by documentation. A notification popped up. James Richardson's office had shared their post, adding a simple comment. We're listening. We're watching. We're here to help. The attorney's reputation for handling civil rights cases added weight to the growing narrative. Marcus pulled up a chair beside her desk, his debate notebook open. Check this out, he said, pointing to a pattern he'd noticed in the comments. People from different neighborhoods, different backgrounds, but similar experiences in that courtroom. Kiera nodded, already adapting her content strategy. She built her agency on helping businesses tell their stories, but this was different. This was family. This was justice. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the office windows, Kiera's team gathered around her station, offering their expertise. Her social media manager suggested optimizing posting times. Her content writer helped craft responses to comments. Her data analyst started categorizing the incoming stories. It's not just about your fine anymore, Kiera told Marcus, showing him the growing engagement metrics. People needed a space to share their stories. They were just waiting for someone to go first. She glanced at her brother, remembering how he used to practice his debate speeches in front of her, always backing his arguments with evidence. Now his story was becoming evidence for something larger, spreading through the digital world one share at a time, each ripple carrying the potential for change. Diana Wu adjusted her press badge in the elevator mirror of the Morning Star news building, replaying her editor's words. Find the story behind the story. What had started as a routine check of trending local social media had led her to Kiera Thompson's perfectly crafted narrative about her brother's court experience. But Diana's instincts told her there was more beneath the surface. The elevator opened to the newsroom's familiar chaos, but Diana headed straight for her desk where 3 screens displayed different aspects of her investigation. Marcus Thompson's viral story, Lisa Chen's detailed court statistics, sent anonymously through a secure channel, and her own growing database of interviews. Wu, got a minute? Jake Martinez, her colleague from the data desk, rolled his chair over. Those court fine patterns you ask about. I ran the numbers going back 5 years. You're going to want to see this. Diana's eyes widened as Jake pulled up his analysis. The graphs showed more than just disparities. They revealed a systematic pattern that couldn't be explained by coincidence. Can we verify all of this? Every data point comes from public records, Jake confirmed. We just needed to know where to look. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Thompson, who had agreed to an interview during her break at the diner. Diana grabbed her notebook and coat, but before she could leave, her editor called her over. Wu, whatever you're working on, it's making waves. Judge Cartwright's office just requested a meeting. They're claiming there's context we need to understand. Diana nodded, already planning her questions. I'll see them after I talk to Sarah Thompson. We need both sides of this story. At the Simple Cup Diner, Sarah Thompson served coffee with one hand while gesturing with the other, describing her late-night documentation project. I'm not just doing this for Marcus anymore, she explained, her voice quiet but firm. Every number in my spreadsheet is somebody's story. Back at the newspaper, Diana crafted her article with meticulous care. She included Judge Cartwright's office's explanation about maintaining community standards, but placed it alongside the statistical evidence. The human stories, Marcus's academic achievements, Sarah's double shifts, Lisa's careful documentation, were woven through the data like golden threads through a tapestry. As she wrote, more stories flooded her inbox. A local teacher who'd received a similar fine, a nurse who'd had to pick up extra shifts, a student who'd dropped out of college after court fees depleted their savings. Each story was fact-checked, each detail verified. The student paper at City University picked up the story, then the law school review. Local news stations began requesting interviews. Diana watched as her investigation sparked others, each new report adding depth to the picture. "Your story goes to print tomorrow," her editor announced late that evening. "Are you ready for the response?" Diana looked at her screens one last time. On one, Kira Thompson was coordinating a respectful social media campaign. On another, James Richardson's legal team was preparing documentation. On the third, community leaders were organizing a town hall meeting. "This isn't just my story," Diana replied, thinking of all the voices that had trusted her to tell their truth. "It's everyone's story now." She made one final edit to her headline. Beyond the gavel, a community seeks answers. Below it, she added a simple tagline that would spark a citywide conversation. "When justice isn't blind, who will open our eyes?" The newsroom hummed with late-night energy as the presses prepared to roll. Tomorrow, the city would wake up to more than just another news story. They would wake up to their own reflection and the questions it raised about justice, fairness, and the power of united voices seeking change. James Richardson adjusted his tie clip, a gift from his grandmother who'd cleaned courthouses for 30 years. The mahogany-lined Superior Court chamber buzzed with whispered conversations as he arranged his documents on the polished table. Today's hearing wasn't just about Marcus Thompson's $500 fine anymore. It represented something much larger. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Elena Martinez entered the courtroom. Known for her meticulous attention to detail, she'd been specifically requested to oversee this hearing due to her reputation for fairness. From his peripheral vision, James saw Sarah Thompson squeeze Marcus's hand. Behind them sat Lisa Chen, clutching a laptop containing months of careful documentation. Kara Thompson sat nearby, her tablet displaying real-time community support messages. Diana Wu from the Morning Star News occupied her usual spot in the press section, pen poised over her notebook. "Your Honor," James began, his voice steady and clear. "Today we present evidence of a pattern that demands attention. This isn't about a single fine or even multiple fines. It's about the very foundation of equal justice under law." He gestured to the screens where Jake Martinez's data visualization appeared, clean, clear, and compelling. The graphs told their story without sensationalism. 5 years of court records, thousands of cases, undeniable patterns. "The numbers speak clearly," James continued, "but behind each data point is a human story." Marcus Thompson, debate team captain, volunteer tutor, early admission to State University. Sarah Thompson, working 2 jobs to support her son's dreams. Their story opened the door, but they weren't alone. Lisa Chen approached the witness stand, her testimony transforming 6 months of late-night documentation into a powerful narrative of systematic disparities. Her voice trembled slightly but grew stronger as she explained her methodology, her commitment to accuracy, her hope for change. Judge Martinez leaned forward, asking precise questions about statistical significance and data collection methods. The court reporter's fingers flew across the keyboard, recording every word of what was becoming a landmark hearing. Defense counsel for Judge Cartwright presented their arguments about judicial discretion and maintaining community standards. James listened respectfully, then responded with more stories, more data, more evidence of the real human impact of disproportionate fines. "Your Honor," James said in his closing argument, "we're not here to assign blame. We're here to acknowledge a problem and work toward a solution. The community isn't asking for special treatment. They're asking for equal treatment. He gestured to the packed courtroom, where people from all walks of life sat together, united in their desire for change. The solution starts with acknowledgement, continues with accountability, and leads to transformation. We have an opportunity to make our justice system live up to its highest ideals. Judge Martinez's chamber's clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. She studied the documents before her, then looked up at the assembled crowd. Her next words would set the tone for everything that followed. This court finds sufficient evidence to warrant a full review of sentencing patterns in our district. Furthermore, I am ordering the creation of a civilian oversight committee to ensure transparency in our fine structure and sentencing guidelines. The courtroom remained silent, but the energy shifted palpably. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Additionally, Judge Martinez continued, all contested fines from the period in question will be reviewed by an independent panel. Mr. Thompson's fine is stayed pending this review. As people began filing out of the courtroom, James caught sight of Marcus and Sarah embracing. Lisa Chen was already typing notes about the Civilian Oversight Committee. Diana Wu was scheduling interviews for follow-up stories. Kara Thompson's fingers flew across her phone, sharing the news with their growing community of supporters. The late afternoon sun streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows, but also illuminating the path forward. In the warm light, James saw not just victory, but possibility. The possibility of lasting change born from one family's courage to stand up and speak out. Judge Maria Hernandez sat in her chambers, surrounded by framed photographs of the hundreds of law students she'd mentored over 20 years. The morning light caught the edge of a new document on her desk, Proposal for Judicial Reform and Community Engagement, its fresh ink barely dry. A knock at her door revealed Judge Cartwright, looking different from the stern figure who'd presided over Marcus Thompson's case months ago. "Maria, you wanted to see me." "Bill," she gestured to a chair, "thank you for coming. I've been reviewing the Civilian Oversight Committee's initial findings, and I have an idea I'd like to discuss." She pulled out a folder containing profiles of local law students, including Marcus Thompson's recent acceptance letter. "Remember when we started? How terrified we were of making mistakes on the bench." Judge Cartwright nodded, his eyes catching sight of a familiar name among the student profiles. "Thompson, isn't he?" "Yes, the same young man from your courtroom. He's just started his first semester of law school. Bill, I think he and others like him could help us build something important here." Over the next hour, they discussed Judge Hernandez's proposal, a comprehensive mentorship program pairing judges with law students and community members. The program would include regular shadowing opportunities, open dialogues about judicial decision-making, and workshops on implicit bias. Across town, at the State University Law School, Marcus sat in his constitutional law class, barely believing he was there. The review panel had not only dismissed his fine, but had created a scholarship fund using penalties collected from documented cases of judicial bias. His phone buzzed quietly. A message from Lisa Chen. "Community Oversight Committee meeting today. Your mother's presentation on data tracking is first on the agenda." Sarah Thompson had transformed her late-night spreadsheets into a formal system for monitoring court equity. Local tech companies had offered support, developing software based on her initial design. The simple Excel file named Hope for Change had evolved into a sophisticated dashboard used by courts across the state. In the courthouse break room, Lisa Chen shared coffee with Diana Wu, who was working on a follow-up story about the reform's impact. "Look at this," Lisa said, showing Diana the latest statistics. "Fine amounts are now consistent across all demographics. But more importantly, judges are choosing alternative sentences, community service, education programs, payment plans." Diana's article would highlight not just the changes in numbers, but the transformation in relationships. Judge Cartwright had surprised everyone by becoming one of the most active participants in the new mentorship program. His recent graduation speech at the Judicial Training Center had focused on the importance of acknowledging mistakes and embracing growth. Kiera Thompson's social media agency had shifted focus, now specializing in civic engagement and legal education. Her viral threads about court procedures and rights had made complex legal concepts accessible to thousands. As the afternoon sun filled Judge Hernandez's chambers, she reviewed applications for the next round of judicial mentorships. Each folder told a story of someone hoping to make a difference. Her eyes paused on a quote from one application. "Justice isn't just about making decisions. It's about understanding the lives those decisions touch." She glanced at her phone, checking the time for today's meeting. The conference room would soon fill with an unlikely gathering. Judges and students, clerks and community members, all working together to build something new. A message popped up from Judge Cartwright. "Maria, just finished my first mentorship session. You were right. I learned more than I taught." Judge Hernandez smiled, remembering a conversation from months ago about the possibility of change. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful transformations come not from confrontation, but from connection. From the moment someone unexpected becomes an ally in the journey toward justice. 1 year later, Marcus Thompson adjusted his graduation cap in the mirror, the tassel swaying gently. His first year of law school had just ended, and today he would address the State University's pre-law program graduation ceremony, the same program that had nearly slipped from his grasp over a traffic fine. "Ready?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, wearing a new dress she bought with her recent promotion bonus. No longer juggling 2 jobs, she now headed the Community Justice Data Initiative, training other districts in implementing her monitoring system. The university auditorium buzzed with excitement. From the stage, Marcus could see familiar faces. Lisa Chen, now teaching a course on legal ethics and data transparency. Kiera, whose documentary about their journey had just won a regional award. Diana Wu, whose series on judicial reform had earned her a Pulitzer nomination. When I stood in traffic court last year, Marcus began his speech, his voice steady and clear. I thought I was facing an ending. Instead, I found a beginning. We all did. The audience included judges, including Cartwright and Hernandez, sitting among community members. The physical barriers of the courtroom had given way to roundtable discussions and open dialogues. Change, Marcus continued, doesn't always announce itself with dramatic gestures. Sometimes it arrives in Excel spreadsheets, sometimes in careful documentation, sometimes in stories shared over diner coffee or in late-night social media posts. He gestured to the graduating class before him. You're entering the legal profession at a time when we've learned that justice isn't just about laws. It's about listening. It's about seeing patterns and having the courage to question them. It's about turning opponents into allies. In the audience, Judge Cartwright nodded, thinking of his morning mentorship session, where he'd shared with students not just his successes, but his moments of growth. His journey from resistance to advocacy had become part of the training curriculum. Sarah watched her son from the front row, remembering nights spent analyzing data while he slept. Her spreadsheet had grown into a statewide database, but more importantly, it had grown into relationships. Networks of people working together for lasting change. The fine that could have derailed my future, Marcus said, instead taught me that justice is a collaborative project. It requires all of us, judges and clerks, parents and students, journalists and activists, working together, learning from each other, believing in the possibility of better. He paused, looking at the faces before him. Today, our courthouse hosts monthly community dialogues. Our judges participate in mentorship programs. Our fines are reviewed for equity. But the most important change isn't in policies or procedures. It's in perspectives. From her seat, Lisa Chen opened her laptop, showing her new clerk trainee the updated dashboard. Green indicators across the board showed consistent fine distributions, increased use of alternative sentencing, and strong community engagement metrics. As I look at my fellow graduates, Marcus concluded, "I see not just future lawyers, but future bridge builders. People who understand that true justice grows not from fear or force, but from understanding and unity." The applause that followed wasn't just for his speech, it was for every person who had played a part in the transformation, for every small act of courage that had added up to significant change. After the ceremony, they gathered in the courtyard. Judges and citizens, students and mentors, advocates and allies. The evening sun cast long shadows, but they weren't the shadows of division anymore. They were the shadows of people standing together, planning next steps, sharing stories, building connections. Sarah hugged her son, whispering, "You did it." Marcus smiled, looking at the gathered crowd. "No, Mom. We did it. All of us." And in that moment, as the sun set on one chapter and rose on another, they all understood that this wasn't just a happy ending. It was a new beginning, an ongoing story of how justice grows stronger when it grows together.